The courtroom buzzed with the low hum of murmurs and the shuffle of papers. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, glinting off the polished wood of the benches and the brass nameplate that read, "Judge." Mr. Booth adjusted his tie nervously, though a smirk crept across his face. He thought he had this all figured out. Another hearing, another routine day. Little did he know, the day was about to take a turn he could never have imagined. He leaned back slightly, scanning the courtroom, barely paying attention to the solemn faces around him. He chuckled quietly to himself. They really take this so seriously, he thought, shaking his head. The sound of his own laughter echoed faintly, cutting through the tense atmosphere. To him, this was just another formality, just another place where he could coast, confident that the outcome was predictable. Across the room, she sat with her robe perfectly pressed, her hands clasped in front of her, exuding calm authority. The gavel, resting just inches away, seemed to hum with latent power. She was quiet, focused, attentive, but there was more behind her eyes than any ordinary judge. There was recognition, memory, a flash of the past that had been buried for decades, a story of friendship, laughter, and innocence long ago, back in the days when life was simpler, before the world had hardened them. As Mr. Booth's eyes wandered, he noticed a subtle nod of acknowledgement from a clerk nearby, but he ignored it, lost in his own self-assured bubble. He barely noticed the judge as she flipped through papers with meticulous precision, her presence commanding yet unassuming. Everything seemed ordinary, routine, predictable, like every other courtroom he had walked into. Yet, beneath that serene exterior, a storm was quietly brewing. He tapped his foot impatiently, glancing at the spectators. Their faces were neutral, some curious, some bored, but for him none of it mattered. Another day, another judgment, he mused, almost arrogantly. He didn't know that the person behind the bench, behind that mask of judicial formality, carried the weight of their shared history. A history that would soon unravel in the most unexpected way. And then, the subtle moment arrived. A pause in the routine, a spark of recognition flickering across her expression. She looked up, meeting his gaze, and something in her eyes made the world shift. The courtroom sounds seemed to fade, the air thickening with tension as the past collided with the present. A flood of memories, school hallways, shared laughter, long-forgotten games, crashed silently between them. Mr. Booth's smirk faltered. Something was off. The routine had shifted. The familiar authority in her voice, the way she looked at him, it was uncanny. And before he could fully process it, the realization began to take hold. This was no ordinary judge. This was someone from his past. Someone he had known long before the courtroom had ever existed. Someone who had shaped a piece of his childhood. The heartbeat of the room seemed to accelerate. Every shuffle, every cough, every subtle glance suddenly felt magnified. He swallowed hard, the confidence he had carried in moments before dissolving into a mix of shock and disbelief. For the first time that day, Mr. Booth felt truly exposed, truly small, and utterly unprepared. And just like that, a simple court hearing transformed into a moment of profound surprise, a collision of past and present, of power and recognition, the kind of moment that changes everything. And yet, no one in the room, not even him, could predict how it would unfold next. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Which city and country? Drop it in the comments. I'm curious to see how far this story reaches. The courtroom seemed to stretch endlessly, every polished surface reflecting the soft afternoon light. Mr. Booth shifted in his seat, tapping his fingers against the wooden armrest. He glanced around, noticing the plain walls, the rows of benches, the subtle hum of ventilation. Each sound, each movement felt distant, almost insignificant. He was focused on one thing, making light of the situation. Humor had always been his shield, and today would be no different. As the bailiff called the proceedings to order, Mr. Booth leaned back with a sly grin. He whispered something under his breath, a joke meant to ease his own nerves, yet loud enough for the clerk nearby to catch. A few people chuckled softly, some frowned. His confidence was evident, too evident. He didn't yet notice the judge's eyes, steady and watchful, resting momentarily on him. The judge, seated with her robe perfectly arranged, allowed a small pause in the proceedings to study the man before her. There was something familiar about him, an echo of a time long past, a face she had once known in the laughter-filled halls of Nautilus Middle School. She blinked, and for a fraction of a second a childhood memory flashed. The boy who had been so full of life, full of mischief, the same boy who had once raced across the field in PE class, triumphant and carefree. She inhaled quietly, forcing herself to focus on the present, reminding herself of the responsibility she carried. Mr. Booth shifted again, unaware of the sudden tightness in the judge's gaze. He began to speak, his tone casual, even irreverent. "Looks like everyone's taking this very seriously, huh?" he muttered to no one in particular. The courtroom tensed slightly, some eyebrows raised. The spectators murmured among themselves. Yet still, the connection, his past with the woman behind the bench, remained hidden to him. The proceedings continued. Evidence was presented, witnesses gave their statements, but Mr. Booth's attention wandered. He made a few quips, small jokes that he thought were clever, all delivered with an air of bravado. "Well, at least this room is warmer than middle school," he joked softly, earning a few nervous chuckles. His confidence filled the air, creating a bubble around him that made him blind to the silent, piercing observations of the judge. Inside her mind, the judge wrestled with the sudden tide of memories. She recalled the boy's laughter, his gentle competitiveness, the way he had carried himself with both pride and vulnerability. Could it really be him? She wondered, trying to reconcile the man before her with the child she once knew. The contrast was stark. Innocence and authority, past and present, playful youth and serious adulthood. Her fingers tightened slightly around the gavel, a small, almost imperceptible sign of the power she held over someone she once called a friend. A witness approached the stand, describing the events leading to the trial. "Mr. Booth smirked, whispering a comment under his breath to the lawyer beside him. Laughter rippled quietly through the room, drawing a few frowns from the spectators. His attempt at humor, as always, was a mask to hide his unease, yet it made him appear more casual, more untouchable. Yet tension built. The judge's eyes never left him, her lips pressed into a thin line as she carefully followed the testimony. A flicker of recognition crossed her features again. She remembered the football games, the shared lunches, the homework they had once agonized over together. The echoes of the past made her heart tighten slightly, a mix of nostalgia and disbelief. The gallery murmured, reacting to Mr. Booth's occasional remarks. The tension in the air was palpable. He laughed once, a little too loudly, and some spectators shifted in their seats. A court officer cleared their throat, attempting to maintain order. Mr. Booth waved dismissively, oblivious. He was fully confident that the day would pass uneventfully. Meanwhile, the judge's mind raced. She reviewed the case files, the law, the evidence, and the man before her. Memories collided with her professional duty. She had to maintain impartiality, but every fiber of her being recognized him. This boy I once knew. Can he really be the same man in front of me now? The thought sent a subtle chill down her spine. She fought to remain composed, aware that any outward sign could disrupt the proceedings. Mr. Booth, sensing a slight shift in atmosphere, paused and glanced up. For the first time, he noticed the judge's gaze, steady and intense. Strange look, he thought, tilting his head, curiosity flickering in his eyes, yet his bravado remained intact. He chuckled under his breath, convinced he understood the room, unaware of the storm quietly brewing behind the bench. As the witness concluded, a small disruption occurred. A murmured comment from the back of the courtroom, a shuffle of papers, a slight cough. The room seemed to react to the unseen tension between Mr. Booth and the judge. He laughed again, trying to diffuse what he sensed but could not yet define. The gallery remained tense. Some shifted nervously, picking up on the subtle energy that neither fully understood. The judge leaned slightly forward, allowing a careful glance at Mr. Booth, her mind running through memories and facts simultaneously. Yes, it has to be him, she thought. A tiny smile almost tugged at the corner of her lips, quickly suppressed. The tension was mounting, both in her chest and across the room. She had to decide when and how to reveal the truth, knowing the impact would be immediate. Every sentence Mr. Booth spoke, every light-hearted quip, served to heighten the tension. His ignorance of the connection made the moment more potent, more explosive. The courtroom seemed suspended in time, caught between the past and present, laughter and authority, innocence and responsibility. Would he ever realize who was truly in control? Would the revelation shatter his confidence, or would it transform the proceedings entirely? The answer lingered just out of reach, as the room waited for the inevitable collision of past and present. The courtroom seemed to pause in that moment, though no one noticed. Mr. Booth leaned forward, casually resting his chin in his hands, scanning the room with mild boredom. His smirk remained in place, masking the faint unease that had started creeping into his chest. The judge cleared her throat, breaking the monotony. She glanced down at the case file, the crisp pages turning softly under her fingers. And then, in a voice calm yet deliberate, she asked the question that would shatter the rhythm of the day. "Mr. Booth, did you go to Nautilus for middle school?" The words hung in the air like an electric charge. Mr. Booth froze mid-laugh, the smirk faltering. He blinked rapidly, trying to reconcile the familiar warmth of the voice with the authority of the robe. The courtroom seemed to contract around him. The walls, the benches, the sunlight, all blurred into the background as his mind raced. Nautilus Middle School. The name struck like a bell from the past. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. It couldn't be, could it? The judge's eyes widened slightly as she spoke, her own shock barely concealed behind a professional mask. She had expected surprise, of course, but the intensity of it, the rapid, involuntary recognition, was breathtaking. Memories flashed before her eyes. The boy with tousled hair racing down the hallways, his laughter echoing across classrooms, the football games they had shared, the shared homework struggles and victories. She had seen him in her mind's eye every so often, wondered what path he had taken, but never imagined it would lead here, to her courtroom. Mr. Booth's face paled as recognition dawned. A faint tremor passed through his hand, almost imperceptible, but enough for the attentive court officer to notice. His usual confidence crumbled, replaced by a mix of disbelief and nostalgia. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The courtroom, once filled with background noise, the hum of the ventilation, the shuffling of papers, faded into a silence so thick it pressed against his ears. "Oh my goodness," the judge whispered under her breath, a soft exhalation that could barely be heard by anyone but herself. The memories were overwhelming. This was the boy she had once played football with, the boy who had been the sweetest, most mischievous child she had ever known. And here he was, standing before her, not as a child, but as a man whose life had diverged so sharply from the innocence of their shared past. Mr. Booth finally managed a weak laugh, a nervous attempt at reclaiming some semblance of control. I remember you," he said haltingly, his voice catching. You were in my class." The courtroom watched in quiet fascination as the tension mounted. Spectators shifted in their seats, sensing that something unusual was unfolding, though they could not yet grasp the depth of the connection. The judge's hands rested lightly on the bench, the gavel untouched. Her voice, usually steady and commanding, carried a softer edge now, tinged with incredulity and warmth. "I always wondered what happened to you, sir," she said, her tone careful but honest. A faint smile tugged at the corners of her lips, almost breaking the professional barrier. She struggled to maintain the authority expected of her role, knowing full well that the balance of power had suddenly gained a personal dimension. Mr. Booth's eyes darted around the room, catching the curious stares of the spectators, the subtle glances of the lawyers, and the restrained shock on the faces of the officers. But all of it seemed secondary to the revelation taking place in the space between him and the judge. The man he had once been, carefree and laughing, collided with the adult reality of his present, and the judge, the person who had shared those formative years, was now the arbiter of his fate. He tried to speak again, fumbling for words that would somehow make the moment less awkward. I didn't expect... wow. His voice trailed off, a nervous chuckle escaping, blending confusion with an almost childlike recognition. The judge's gaze softened, but the courtroom's weight remained. Her role demanded impartiality, yet her heart tugged her toward the old friendship. Could she reconcile the boy she once knew with the man before her? A slight tension entered the air, the kind that could almost be felt physically. The spectators leaned forward instinctively, as if sensing the invisible thread connecting the two lives. Mr. Booth shifted uncomfortably, his bravado now entirely dismantled. The courtroom, a place of rigid rules and procedure, had become a stage for a deeply personal reunion. The judge took a deliberate breath, grounding herself in professionalism while letting a trace of humanity shine through. "You were one of the kindest kids in middle school," she murmured, voice steady but gentle. "I hope you're able to find your way, sir, to make choices that lead to a lawful, meaningful life." Her words, though softly spoken, carried immense weight, each syllable resonating with authority and empathy. Mr. Booth's lips parted, but he remained silent, struck by the juxtaposition of authority and personal history. The air in the courtroom seemed charged, every spectator sensing that a story far greater than the legal matter at hand was unfolding. The usual rhythm of the trial had vanished, replaced by the collision of past and present. Small, almost imperceptible ironies appeared in the moment. The boy she had once seen as mischievous and charming was now before her as an adult whose path had veered dangerously. And yet, the same warmth, the same spark of character, lingered. The juxtaposition was surreal. The judge, a figure of strict law and order, feeling a tender connection to the man she had once known so innocently. The courtroom murmured faintly, as if the very walls recognized the tension. Mr. Booth's usual antics, his jokes, his smirks, had vanished. The reality of the situation, the authority of the judge, and the shared past coalesced into an invisible pressure that settled over him like a weight. He could almost hear the echoes of their shared laughter from decades ago, now mingled with the present gravity. As the minutes stretched, the recognition deepened. The judge's eyes, steady and unwavering, communicated not just authority, but the lingering memories of a shared childhood. She allowed herself a brief, compassionate smile, acknowledging the man before her without compromising her duty. Mr. Booth, for the first time, saw the full measure of her power, not just the legal authority, but the personal awareness of someone who had once truly known him. What would come next? Would Mr. Booth be able to regain composure, or would this revelation shape the outcome of the trial in ways neither of them could anticipate? The courtroom waited, time stretching as the past and present intertwined in a tension both silent and profound. The courtroom had grown quiet again, the faint rustle of papers and the subtle creak of chairs now the only sounds. Mr. Booth remained frozen, still trying to process the revelation. The judge, her gaze soft but unwavering, leaned slightly forward, her hands resting lightly on the bench. Her voice, though steady, carried a warmth that surprised everyone listening. "Oh my goodness, I'm sorry to see you there," she began, her tone gentle, almost like a whisper meant for him alone. Her eyes reflected a mix of disbelief and compassion, a spark of the teacher she once knew hidden beneath the robe of authority. "I always wondered what happened to you, sir." Mr. Booth blinked rapidly, unsure how to respond. His usual bravado had evaporated completely, replaced by a vulnerability he hadn't felt in years. The courtroom seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them suspended in a collision of past and present. Memories surfaced, School hallways, lunchroom laughs, football games, and shared homework. The innocence of youth pressed against the weight of the courtroom, creating a tension both poignant and surreal. He cleared his throat, voice shaking slightly. I didn't expect... it's been a long time. His gaze fell to the floor, then back to her eyes. The man he was now, confident, sharp, yet worn by life's choices, stood before someone who had once known him at his purest, most innocent. The disparity was stark, almost painful. The judge nodded slowly, a small, empathetic smile tugging at the corners of her lips. She remembered the boy he had been. Mischievous, curious, full of energy and potential. She had seen him play football, watched him chase dreams with relentless enthusiasm, and marveled at his laughter that could brighten the dullest classroom. He was one of the nicest kids in middle school, she thought, silently acknowledging the irony of life's twists. Oh my goodness, he was the best kid in middle school, she continued, her voice carrying both nostalgia and gentle reproach. I used to play football with him, all the kids, and look at what has happened. Her words floated over the courtroom, delicate yet powerful, as if bridging decades in a single breath. Mr. Booth swallowed hard. The memories were vivid, painful, and yet strangely comforting. He had long wondered about her, what path she had taken, whether she remembered those long-forgotten days. Now staring into her eyes, he realized that the woman behind the bench was not only aware of him, but had carried those memories all along. The weight of their shared past pressed upon him, softening the walls he had built around himself. A hush fell over the spectators, sensing the unusual intimacy between judge and defendant. The tension shifted from formal proceedings to something profoundly human, a silent story unfolding in the space between them. Mr. Booth's hands trembled slightly as he clasped them together on the desk before him. His voice, when it came, was quieter, almost fragile. I hope I can change my ways, he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. The courtroom held its collective breath, the outcome momentarily overshadowed by the emotional resonance of the reunion. The judge's expression softened further, a mixture of empathy and measured caution. She knew the law, the rules, the responsibility she carried, but she also knew the boy she had once laughed with in the schoolyard. I hope you're able to come out of this okay, and just lead a lawful life, man, she said, her tone calm, deliberate, yet suffused with the compassion of someone who had once truly cared for the child before her. The courtroom seemed to exhale, the weight of tension giving way to an almost surreal sense of hope and reflection. Mr. Booth nodded slowly, absorbing the gravity of her words. He could feel the difference between the past and present pressing upon him, the innocence of middle school, the mistakes of adulthood, and the possibility of redemption all intertwining. He glanced at the spectators, realizing that the story unfolding before them was far more than a simple trial. It was a collision of lives, choices, and memories. The judge's mind wandered briefly, revisiting images of long-forgotten school days, the gymnasium echoing with laughter, the library filled with whispered conversations, the playground where every challenge seemed monumental and every triumph unforgettable. And here he was, the boy she had once known so intimately, now standing as a man facing the consequences of choices made over years. The contrast was stark, almost cinematic, and it weighed heavily on her heart. What will she decide now? Will her memories and empathy influence the verdict? Can the past truly offer him a chance at redemption, or will justice demand its course? The courtroom waited silently, every heartbeat amplifying the tension between duty and connection. Mr. Booth finally spoke again, voice steadier but tinged with vulnerability. I remember the laughs, the games, everything. His eyes glistened slightly, betraying the storm of emotion he struggled to contain. The judge's gaze softened even more, and she allowed herself a brief, almost imperceptible nod, acknowledging both the man he had become and the child he once was. The spectators leaned forward, drawn into the narrative unfolding before them. They sensed the weight of decades, the collision of innocence and adulthood, authority and familiarity. The courtroom was no longer just a place for legal proceedings. It had become a stage for reconciliation, reflection, and the unspoken possibility of forgiveness. The judge's tone remained calm, professional, but layered with personal connection. "I always wondered how life led you here," she said softly. "We never truly know the paths people take, the choices they make, until we see them face to face." Her words lingered in the air, a bridge between past and present, judgment and empathy. Mr. Booth nodded, absorbing every syllable. The courtroom seemed suspended in time, caught in the tension between the boy he had been and the man he had become. Every memory, every shared laugh, every playful argument from decades ago now bore weight in this moment. Will the judge's compassion influence the verdict? Can Mr. Booth prove he has changed? The questions hovered, unanswered, as the narrative teetered between justice and personal history. The courtroom was thick with tension, every subtle sound amplified. The shuffle of papers, the creak of benches, the faint cough of a spectator. Mr. Booth sat rigid, aware now of every eye on him, but none as piercing as the one behind the bench. The judge's gaze was unwavering, oscillating between the stern authority of the law and the soft empathy that only someone who truly knew him could feel. "You have a chance to speak," she said, her voice calm, deliberate, cutting through the ambient murmurs. "Explain yourself. Tell me why your actions brought us here." Mr. Booth swallowed, his throat tight. He remembered the laughter of their youth, the games they had played, the innocence that now felt like another lifetime. I made mistakes," he began, his voice quivering. "I didn't think about the consequences. I thought I could get away with it." "Ooh," his eyes met hers, pleading for understanding, yet the weight of his choices pressed heavily on the room. The judge nodded slowly, letting the silence linger. She remembered the boy he had been, full of charm and mischief, but that boy was now gone, replaced by a man who carried both the weight of decisions and the echoes of lost potential. The contrast was painful, a knife twisting in the fabric of memory and duty. Around them, the courtroom reacted subtly, a cough, a shuffle of papers, a gasp at the tension palpable in the air. Every spectator was caught between curiosity, empathy, and the rigid expectation of justice. The stakes had never felt higher. Mr. Booth's hands trembled slightly as he clasped them together. I never wanted to hurt anyone," he added, voice breaking. The judge's fingers tightened lightly around the gavel. Her heart ached at the confession, yet her role demanded impartiality. Justice could not be swayed solely by nostalgia or sympathy. Could she reconcile the personal past with professional duty? The judge took a deep breath, her mind racing. She had to apply the law fairly, yet she could not ignore the boy she had known, the laughter, the innocence, the shared memories. Every syllable she spoke carried weight, not just legal authority, but moral judgment. "Mr. Booth," she said, voice firmer, "you must understand the consequences of your actions. The law does not bend for memory or sentiment." The statement rippled through the courtroom. Mr. Booth flinched, realizing the gravity of the moment. He had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that recognition alone could temper judgment. But reality pressed hard. The law was impartial, unyielding, and now demanded response. He swallowed again, voice steadier now, laced with regret. "I understand. I just wish I had made better choices." His gaze dropped, tracing the lines of the polished floor. The judge studied him silently, weighing the balance between authority and empathy. Suddenly, a subtle disruption, a whispered comment from the back of the gallery, a shuffle of papers drew attention. Mr. Booth's eyes flicked up, the tension in the room increasing. Every movement seemed magnified, every reaction charged with unspoken meaning. The judge's mind raced, recalling the boy he had been, the laughter, the football games, the shared secrets of adolescence. Will she show leniency, or will the law demand full accountability? The courtroom felt smaller now, compressed by the invisible weight of history. Mr. Booth shifted uncomfortably, his bravado stripped away, leaving vulnerability exposed. The judge leaned slightly forward, her gaze unwavering. "You must make amends," she said, voice calm but firm. "Your path from here depends on recognizing the wrongs, taking responsibility, and choosing differently." The words struck deep, a mix of authority and guidance. Mr. Booth nodded, absorbing each one. The echo of their shared past lingered, coloring every thought, every heartbeat. He realized finally the depth of the consequences and the chance for redemption now clearly in front of him. The audience remained silent, caught in the emotional tension. Some leaned forward, others clasped hands tightly. The energy in the room was thick, charged, as if every observer sensed the collision of past and present, authority and empathy, consequence and possibility. Can a single moment of recognition and empathy alter the course of justice? Mr. Booth's eyes welled slightly with emotion. I want to change," he whispered. The judge's expression softened, but only just. Her duty remained clear. She must ensure accountability, but she could now do so with understanding. The courtroom held its collective breath, waiting for the delicate balance between judgment and compassion to play out. The judge stood for a moment, silent, allowing the weight of the moment to settle. She thought of the boy he had been, the man he was, and the potential for the man he could become. Her decision would not only serve justice, but also reflect the human capacity for recognition, forgiveness, and growth. Will the verdict honor both the law and the shared past? Mr. Booth's shoulders slumped slightly, a silent surrender to reality. Yet in that surrender, there was also a spark of hope. He understood, perhaps for the first time, the true weight of his choices and the opportunity for redemption. The judge's eyes softened, a subtle acknowledgement of his understanding, a bridge between the authority of the court and the empathy of shared history. Every word now carried double weight, the legal, the moral, and the emotional. The courtroom seemed to pulse with unspoken tension, the walls echoing with memories, regrets, and the faint possibility of reconciliation. The judge's gavel rested heavy, yet it was not just an instrument of law. It was a symbol of the delicate balance between justice and humanity. Will the final decision satisfy both the expectations of the law and the empathy of a shared past? The final moments of the trial approached, every second stretched taut. Mr. Booth's fate hung in the balance, but so did the recognition of a lifelong connection, memories of innocence, and the acknowledgement that every choice leads to consequence. The courtroom waited, silent, breathless, as the climax unfolded. Every eye fixed on the judge, who carried both the robe of authority and the memories of a shared past. The courtroom was still, the silence almost tangible. Mr. Booth sat upright, hands folded nervously on the desk in front of him, the weight of every decision pressing heavily on his shoulders. The judge cleared her throat, the sound echoing through the chamber like a gentle drumbeat, calling attention to the moment that would define the culmination of decades of intertwined lives. "Mr. Booth," she began, her voice steady yet layered with warmth, "we have reached the conclusion of today's proceedings." She paused, letting the gravity of her words sink in. Every pair of eyes in the courtroom focused on her, the spectators aware that this was more than a routine judgment. It was the intersection of law, morality, and human history. Mr. Booth's breath caught. He could feel the anticipation coiling like a spring in the room. The memories of the past, the laughter of middle school hallways, the shared football games, and the playful debates over homework, every detail seemed to merge with the present moment. He had expected a judge to be distant, impartial, untouched by sentiment. Yet here she was, someone who had known him in his most innocent years, balancing empathy and duty with astonishing grace. The judge's eyes softened as they met his, reflecting a mixture of authority and understanding. "You were once a boy I played football with, laughed with, and watched grow with curiosity and kindness," she said softly, her words carrying across decades of memory. Today, you stand before me as a man facing the consequences of your choices. The law requires accountability, but it also recognizes the capacity for redemption. The words struck him deeply, a mixture of relief and sober awareness. Mr. Booth nodded slowly, understanding the full weight of what was being communicated. This was not just a legal outcome, it was a reflection of the human journey from innocence to experience, error to responsibility, and the possibility of renewal, even in the wake of past mistakes. We cannot ignore the impact of your actions, the judge continued, her voice firm but measured. Yet I also recognize the potential for growth, for learning, for change. It is not enough to punish. One must guide, teach, and allow the possibility of transformation. A hush fell over the courtroom. The spectators leaned forward, sensing the delicate balance being struck. This was a verdict not only of law, but of human understanding. Mr. Booth felt a lump in his throat, memories pressing against him, a mixture of shame and gratitude washing over him in waves. He realized that, for the first time in years, he truly understood the consequences of his choices and the opportunity to redefine his life. You will face consequences appropriate to your actions, she said, her tone unwavering. But these consequences are also an opportunity, a chance to reflect, to grow, to make amends, and to live a lawful and meaningful life. The courtroom remained silent, the impact of her words settling like dust in sunlight. Mr. Booth exhaled slowly, the tension in his chest easing slightly. He had been prepared for condemnation, for distance, for judgment devoid of empathy. Instead, he encountered understanding, guidance, and a firm expectation that he would rise to meet the challenge of accountability. Mini cliffhanger. Would he embrace this chance at redemption, or would the weight of the past continue to define him? The judge's gaze softened further. She could see the flicker of realization in his eyes, the acknowledgement that his life's path was now partly in his own hands, guided by the lessons of the past and the expectations of the present. Even friends of childhood, she said, voice gentle, cannot alter the fact that I hold responsibility here. Respect, responsibility, and accountability are not determined by memory or familiarity. They are earned every day. Mr. Booth's shoulders slumped, a gesture of acceptance and humility. The man who had once been mischievous, carefree, and perhaps reckless, now faced a future that demanded reflection and conscious choice. The past, vivid and poignant, was no longer just memory. It was a guide, a mirror reflecting both errors and potential. The judge tapped the gavel lightly, a rhythm that punctuated the closure of the courtroom drama. This concludes today's session, she said, her tone formal but infused with personal resonance. Take this moment to understand the weight of your actions, the impact on others, and the possibility for growth. Let it guide your path forward. Mr. Booth nodded, gratitude evident in his expression. He felt the presence of decades of memories, some painful, some joyful, all converging to shape this pivotal moment. The innocence of youth, the mistakes of adulthood, and the chance for redemption now existed together in a fragile but undeniable balance. The spectators filed out slowly, murmurs of astonishment and reflection spreading through the room. Some exchanged glances, struck by the emotional depth of the encounter. Others whispered about the extraordinary human connection that had transcended the formalities of law. Yet the true resonance of the moment remained between the judge and Mr. Booth, a silent understanding of the intricate threads that connect past, present, and future. Mini cliffhanger, how would his life change after this moment? Could he truly live differently, guided by both accountability and the memory of someone who believed in him? The judge watched him as he rose, a subtle nod acknowledging both the man he had become and the boy she had once known. Go forward with awareness, with responsibility, and with respect, she said quietly, almost to herself as much as to him. The choices you make from now on define the life you will lead. Mr. Booth stepped away from the desk, his movements deliberate, each step a meditation on the lessons learned. The courtroom, now returning to its usual rhythm, felt different somehow, charged with the weight of history and the promise of future possibilities. He understood, perhaps for the first time, the true measure of respect, accountability, and personal transformation. As the courtroom emptied, the judge lingered for a moment, reflecting on the extraordinary convergence of past and present. Childhood memories, long thought distant, had resurfaced with urgency and clarity. She realized that authority was not just about the law, it was about recognizing humanity, guiding it, and balancing justice with empathy. Mini cliffhanger. Could such recognition and compassion shape the outcomes of future choices? Finally, she rose from the bench, signaling the official closure of the trial. Mr. Booth gave a quiet nod of gratitude, the gravity of the moment etched into his demeanor. The collision of childhood familiarity and adult responsibility had forged a path forward, one defined by reflection, accountability, and the potential for redemption. The courtroom emptied, leaving echoes of laughter and past memories mingling with the solemnity of justice. The judge paused briefly, allowing herself a small, contemplative smile. She knew that the boy she had once known now carried lessons far beyond the walls of Nautilus Middle School, lessons that would guide him through life if he chose to embrace them. Even friends of childhood can't alter the responsibilities of adulthood. Respect, accountability, and the consequences of actions are universal truths. Recognition of the past can offer empathy, but the power to change lives and to be accountable remains in the hands of the present. Have you ever encountered someone from your past in an unexpected situation? How did it change your perspective? Share your story in the comments, like if this story moved you, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible true stories that remind us of the power of human connection, empathy, and the lessons of life.